Nsalmilkom u nilqakom l-intervista oħra tal-MaltaToday. Din il-ġimgħa smajna l-aħbar li l-Iżrael u l-Ħamas aċċettaw għall-pjan ta' paċi f'Gaza. Biex nifhmu ftit iktar l-impatt ta' dan il-pjan fuq Gaza kif ukoll fuq Stat Palestinjan, illum se nkunu qed nintervistaw l-Ambaxxatur Palestinjan Fadi Hanania. Your Excellency, thank you for accepting our request for an interview. Obviously, this interview comes just a day after Donald Trump, the US president, unveiled this 20-point peace plan for Gaza, so to speak. This plan should see a stop to the fighting as well as a possible pathway towards Palestinian statehood as well. How hopeful are you that this peace plan will work?
Well, thank you for coming here today and giving us this opportunity to be on the Maltese media. We hope that this plan ends the suffering after 2 years. We really welcome this plan and any plan that will put forward on the table to end the 2 years of aggression against our people in Gaza, against the starving of the people in Gaza, against basically destroying any element of survival in Gaza, including food, medical care, health care, water, electricity, fuel. People were basically living in rubble for 2 years, and this plan hopefully gives us hope for the people who have lost everything basically in Gaza for the past 2 years.
So this is a hopeful plan. There's hope in this plan that it will be fulfilled from beginning to end, so to speak.
Well, it seems this time the plan is legitimate. There have been so many plans that were put forward to end the attacks against Gaza, but this time we feel that the American administration are true and honest about their plan. And don't forget that this comes after the momentum of the recognitions by the international community. So this plan came as a response to the momentum that is rising in the whole world that the attacks should stop, that the Palestinians do deserve to live freely in dignity in their own land. So this plan, as we see it, is a response to all these demonstrations in the streets, the recognitions, the international communities, and the public's will to allow our people to live in freedom and dignity.
So you're hopeful that this will bring an end to the fighting. What about maybe going very long term now? Are you hopeful that this will lead to a more legitimate, so to speak, Palestinian state authority in Gaza?
Well, first of all, Gaza should never be treated as a humanitarian file. Gaza is a political issue. For many years, over 77 years, as you know, Palestinians have been under occupation. So it is about time to treat Palestine, Gaza, West Bank, and East Jerusalem as a political file, not only as a humanitarian issue. As much as we would love the humanitarian aid to flow into Gaza now, as the plan already started on the grounds in Gaza, there was withdrawal this morning, as we believe it happened. People are being freely moving in Gaza, going back to their homes. So it is about time for a political issue to start. As much as the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem has been administrated in the conflict-wise, it's about time to end and the occupation and the find solution that guarantees the Palestinians can live freely in their own land.
Mm-hmm. And when you say like you're ending the occupation, because obviously there's a situation in Gaza, there's also the situation in the West Bank, so to speak. What do you think the end of occupation would look like in both areas?
If there is a will, there is always a way. We definitely believe in this. What's happening in Gaza, it can be reconstructed very easily if there is an international community will to allow the Palestinian state to take its responsibilities in Gaza's Strip, allowing the Palestinians to start reconstructing their area. With the supervision of the UN, we have no problem. Actually, on the contrary, we would love the international community to help us in rebuilding Gaza. Gaza needs so much to start with. First of all, the people. The people have been gone through trauma, through losing their children, so many orphaned children as well in Gaza. All these would need trauma, psychology, physical, medical care. So we have to start with the people. At the same time, in parallel, we have to start building a new city in Gaza. Gaza is totally rebelled. There is no way that people can survive the way it is. So there has to be a plan that should not take long to rebuild Gaza. This is the first issue. The second issue will be the West Bank. The West Bank has been subject to so many Israeli unilateral actions in the in the late 2 years because people have been focusing on Gaza and no one is focusing on what's happening in the West Bank. For example, we have a Jenin refugee camp in the West Bank that has been for 9 months under siege. 9 months people in the refugee camp can't move. They're not allowed to have only few access, like daily hours to leave the camp, to buy humanitarian aid, to buy food. So all these actions in the West Bank has been blocked from the media. We have total annexation of Palestinian land. We have more than 1,200 barriers and gates blocking our movement from a city to another. Beside the illegal settlements, more than 800,000 Israelis live in these illegal settlements. But we believe that if there is an international community will, the settlements can be easily dismantled, the roadblocks, the checkpoints can be easily removed, and we can easily establish Palestinian state on the 1967 border. But it all needs a real and honest international will. And we have seen with the recent recognition that this could easily happen. 12 countries just recognized Palestine lately. 4 countries recognized us last year. And more countries should recognize us. It's a moral obligation to the international community who believe in justice and who believe in peace. What we're seeing from these huge demonstrations, shut down in Italy, for example, would definitely be subject to the governments in recognizing Palestinian state.
All right. And do you fear maybe that the plan, because obviously there's a lot of optimism around the plan, but there's always the risks that the plan could be scuppered, possibly by extremists on either side of the conflict. Do you think that that is a real risk that the plan faces?
Well, as long as the negotiations are still going for the plan, we believe that there is a way to implement it this time. I truly, and we as Palestinians truly wish that this plan is implemented for one main reason: to end the aggression against the people, to end the killing of the people, and to allow humanitarian aid. This is our main goal now. People need to stop suffering. After this, all the negotiations can agree on who is released and who is allowed to leave Gaza and who's allowed. Like, all these has to go through tough and thorough negotiations. It will not happen in one day, of course. It's a long procedure to end it, but most importantly now is to end the killing and the suffering of the people. The details, as we have seen, there's so much details that are not announced in the plans. Like, there's only the 20 points, but it seems that there are some other issues that were agreed on but were not released. And we hope that we will know what is happening for the best of our people at least.
What do you think are the threats, so to speak, to the plan at this stage? The threats that will need to be mitigated to make sure that the plan goes ahead successfully?
Well, again, Israel is occupying power. So anything, I would say, it depends on Israel. If they are serious about stopping the attacks, as they said and as they promised President Trump, then there should not be any obstacles to implement the plan on the ground. But if Israelis are not serious about the plan and they were just going along for the media and for the repetition, which they have lost so much in the past 2 years, then that's another thing. But from our side, we are committed to end the suffering at all costs.
Throughout the conflict, and it has been 2 years since the October 7th attacks, but in the past 2 years, it seems like the Palestinian Authority has been very absent from the conflict in Gaza, at least. What do you make of this? I mean, do you see this as possibly even a failing on the Palestinian Authority's side to possibly get a bit more involved, serve as some sort of mediator of sorts in that conflict? What do you make of it?
Well, you have to keep in mind that Hamas took over Gaza in 2006 and they killed so many of the Fatah and Palestinian Authority personnel in Gaza. So Hamas taking over in Gaza, okay, it came after election that Hamas won in the parliament, but then they had to queue over the Palestinian Authority because we were in charge of basically all the services in Gaza, West Bank, and even East Jerusalem for the Palestinians. But what happened after 2006, Hamas was in power in Gaza. We cannot deny this. They even had their army, they had their police forces in Gaza, and the Palestinian Authority was still in charge of education, medical care. We were still paying 55% of our budget to Gaza. We never gave up on Gaza, but the power on the ground was in the hands of Hamas. But the services we were still in charge of our people in Gaza. So what's happening lately, as you're saying, the Palestinian Authority is not empowered in Gaza. We still have our power, but what happened after October 7, as you mentioned, was between Hamas and Israel. And the Palestinian Authority, as much as we tried to provide aid for the people who were still under attacks, but we truly felt that we're trying to help our people in Gaza for their basic needs. When it comes to the power in Gaza, it's about time for the international community to allow us to have elections, as the President Abbas said at the UN, in order to have a new Palestinian leadership. And President Abbas outlined how this leadership should be according to the PLO standards. Of course, the PLO, you know, is a Palestinian Liberation Organization that includes all the Palestinian factions under it. So anyone who wants to run for elections should comply with the PLO standards.
Do you see a role possibly? I mean, the plan very much includes Hamas. And in a way, as you said, like this conflict was between Israel and Hamas. Obviously, it represents far more than that, but I mean, it's October 7th happened because of
Yes,
Hamas.
but the suffering was on the Palestinian people
Exactly.
At the end of the day. Hamas was used by the whole international community to blame, but the people who were suffering on the ground, the people who were killed were almost 70,000 Palestinians. 99% of them, I would say, civilians. Over 250,000 were wounded, and they're all Palestinian civilians. Even the people who were in charge of the media, of journalists, of medical care were killed in these attacks in Gaza. So it's not about Hamas, it's about the Palestinian entire people who are living in Gaza. Yes, the West, the media, and yes, all the media say it's Hamas and Israel, but the suffering lies on the Palestinian people. And one more point, you're saying that it was an agreement between Hamas and Israel with the US, Turkey, Qatar, Egypt, and many other countries were involved. But we believe as Palestinian Authority, well, the state of Palestine, we will take our responsibilities in Gaza. There is no way that Gaza can be only run and controlled by international power. It's a Palestinian entity. It's part of the Palestinian land. It's the beating heart of Palestine, Gaza. It has always been, and it will be. We are sure that between these talks, we will have the main role of leading Gaza. Gaza doesn't need really police forces now. Actually, on the contrary, they need medical care, they need help, they need assistance, they need humanitarian workers. They don't need police forces as the international community is trying to make a police force for Gaza. Yes, we need police to control security and safety of the citizens there, but what people really need is more humanitarian aid.
Do you foresee a situation in the future where, say, Gaza and the West Bank are sort of united under one, in the sense because Gaza has always been more associated and Hamas has been in power there for so many years. In the West Bank, it's a different situation. Do you foresee a situation where the two areas are sort of a bit more united politically in that sense, like in the political leadership of the two areas?
Well, let me put it easier. Gaza is by the sea. It's only 45-minute away drive from the West Bank. I would say like Malta and Gozo. You have the same issue here. Gaza is the same size of Malta. Exact same size. Okay, it's way much more inhabited. We have over 2 million people in Gaza, but how countries manage to reunite and reunify islands to make their own states, it's the same scenario between us. Gaza on one side, the West Bank on the other side, and don't forget East Jerusalem as the capital of the Palestinian people. And I truly believe that stability in the Middle East can never happen without having a Palestinian state. Not because of any reason, because occupation has to end. 77 years of brutal occupation has to end. People, not only in Palestine, but even in the whole Arab world, and the people's will in the streets who believe in humanity, and people united can always do it. That's why I'm saying that the only solution for the Middle East is by establishing a Palestinian state. And the Palestinian state means Gaza, West Bank, and East Jerusalem. They are the main three elements of establishing a Palestinian state. We have seen what happened to Gaza in 2006, and we don't want this to happen in any part of Palestine. Not for only our cause, but for the whole region. I mean, we are surrounded by so many countries, including Israel, Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, and Egypt, who tried to have treaties with Israel. Like Jordan and Egypt already have peace treaties with Israel, but in reality, these are just ink on papers. When it comes to people's interaction, to people projects, you don't see it because we are still under occupation. And we have around 8 million refugees, including 2 million in Jordan, 500,000 in Lebanon, 500,000 in Syria. So our people are part of these communities, and they interfere with the politics of these communities as much as we try not to interfere with the politics of other countries, but we are there. So the key solution for the Middle East is the creation of a reunified Palestinian state, Gaza, West Bank, and East Jerusalem.
Now, before going on to other topics, just a final question having to do with the peace plan. But Hamas going forward, because the plan sort of makes certain points about how Hamas should demilitarize, and there will Israel offering safe passage, well, not necessarily Israel, but Hamas being offered safe passage. Yes. What do you think this means on the ground in Gaza? Do you think this would empower Hamas in some way? Do you feel like this will weaken and possibly very strongly weaken Hamas's position in Gaza? What do you think this peace plan means?
Well, this is the most point that we agree with. There should only be one weapon in Gaza. The state of Palestine weapon in Gaza, just to secure safety and security of the people. Hamas should never have, or any other faction should never have weapons in Gaza. Only the legitimate Palestinian Authority should have it. What Israel offering, and according to the Trump plan for Gaza, a safe passage for Hamas fighters, who will identify who's Hamas fighter? Why would anyone say, I am a Hamas fighter, for example, and he will have to leave Gaza? It doesn't make much sense for these fighters to come out and say, here's our weapon, we are leaving. Like, it's not logic to implement this part. But on the other hand, Israel have said many times that they want to end the Hamas rule in Gaza. But the Hamas rule in Gaza should be ended by the Palestinian people as well, when Hamas realizes that there only should be one weapon in Gaza and the state of Palestine has to take its responsibility there. According to the plan, there are so much ambiguous points, including what is the future of Hamas, for example. Would Hamas stay as a faction or not? For us, Hamas was a political faction, but after what's happening now, we believe that Hamas should step down and let the people decide in fair elections who will lead the Palestinians.
Now, to move on to another topic, the recognition of the Palestinian state. Malta was one of many countries that, I can't remember if it was last week or the week before, that decided to formally recognize the state of Palestine. How do you think this helps the Palestinian cause, essentially?
Well, as we were saying, for example, this new plan was put forward after all these recognitions. If France, UK, Malta, Luxembourg, Ireland, Spain, and so many, Australia, Canada, so many other big countries did not take the step, we would not see this attention to the Palestinian people. As we are seeing in the street, there's a huge momentum towards the Palestinian just cause. People are fed up from seeing us being killed, being subject to Israeli aggression every day, non-stop. Huge number of Palestinians are being killed. Yes, we became numbers, unfortunately, in the news. This number of Palestinians have been killed today, forgetting that each and every single person of these had dreams, has his story. Each and every person of these had a family, for example. Palestinians have become just numbers in the international media, and people in the streets have realized that this has to end. These people have the right to live freely and in dignity and freedom as well. So this recognition gives us this extra hope and strengthen our position once we go into negotiations for the final status, which we hope will happen now after this plan. So these recognitions are a significant player in determining the future of the creation of Palestinian state.
You mentioned final status. What do you mean by that?
Final status means the agreement on the borders. Until today, Israel is a country without borders, for example. Israel has to realize that according to international law, international resolution, they should have a country with its borders. We recognize Israel's rights of existence in 1993 during the Oslo Agreement. The PLO signed an agreement with Israel. Supposedly we will have our state by the year 2000, but it never happened. But we still recognize Israel as a state. But Israel needs to reunify their borders. And the borders should be according to the 1967 plan, with East Jerusalem part of the Palestinian state. This all has to be negotiated in the final status.
Okay. And do you expect states that have recognized Palestine now to be a bit more active when it comes to the implementation of this peace plan, for example?
Definitely. This is when the real work starts. Once you recognize us as a state, you'll have to defend us. We, in the eyes of these countries, are people under occupation, a state under occupation. This completely changes the status of the state of Palestine to these countries. The countries that just recognize Palestine should deal with the Palestinian people as people under occupation. And when you are under occupation, it means the occupier has to guarantee your safety and security, which is not happening in our case. In contrary, the occupier is the one who's subjecting us to all these massacres, to the annexation of land, to imposing so many sanctions on our freedom, on blockage on Gaza humanitarian aid. And Gaza blockage was not just recent, it has been there since 2006. So for these countries, they need to start the day after they recognize. As we were telling the Prime Minister when he visited us in the embassy last week for the raising of the flag ceremony, this is the time to start working for implementing the state that you just recognized. Recognizing a state means that you need to help these people to implement the recognition on the grounds.
Malta was there was a bit of a delay between formally announcing that the intention to recognize the Palestinian state and then actually doing it. What did you make of this at first? And was there a reason possibly given to you as to why it was being delayed so much?
Well, let me be clear about this. When I became ambassador here, I was checking what kind of official agreements we have with Malta. Bilateral agreements, any signed agreements. So I realized that we did not really have an official and formal recognition. We had only one statement that was submitted to the United Nations on 26th of November 1988 by Malta's ambassador to the United Nations, saying that Malta reaffirms its recognition of the Palestinian people right to have their own state. But we were officially never recognized. But on the other hand, an embassy of the State of Palestine was opened here in 1988. And I presented my credentials in 2019 as ambassador of the State of Palestine to the President of the Republic of Malta. So I was officially the ambassador of the State of Palestine, but according to the Maltese government, they saw that this was not an official recognition. So when the Prime Minister promised the Spanish Prime Minister Sanchez at that time to recognize Palestine as a state, there was a bit of confusion. And I've talked to the Maltese that we already consider that Malta recognized Palestine as state after the 1988 declaration. But then we had many talks, and then we insisted that we needed Malta to formally recognize Palestine as a state. And this is what the Prime Minister did. Why it took almost a year and a half to do it? First of all, we had to go through the legal path, whether a formal recognition or no. Was the 1988 statement considered as a recognition or no? So we decided to go ahead and do a new formal full recognition of the state of Palestine. The delay, I doubt it was anything intentional. It was just waiting, as the Maltese were saying, for the right moment. And we believe that they did well by recognizing Palestine at the two-state conference in New York. Malta has been always supportive for us from our side. They were the first to open a PLO office in the 70s. They've always recognized our rights. The Mentov, the Marco, all these leaders have really stopped with the Palestinian pursuit for justice.
So in other news this week, I don't know how much you want to talk about it necessarily, but Foreign Minister Ian Borch did nominate Donald Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize. From a Palestinian perspective, because I'm sure there are people out there who do see Donald Trump as this peace broker in some way or another, but from a Palestinian perspective, and even from the news of yesterday, do you feel that Donald Trump is living up to this image of being some sort of peace brokering negotiator in foreign affairs?
Well, first of all, with all due respect to Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Foreign Affairs, we're not sure when the nomination happened. Did it happen last January when Trump was first inaugurated to office? Well, that doesn't make much sense because he was still new to the office and he didn't do any agreements back then. But if it's a recent one, then it means that it was presented to President Trump for his efforts, as the statement said, between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Yes. But for us as Palestinians, we believe that he could have done much, much more before. He's the only one who can force Israel to stop. He's the only one who has good relations with Netanyahu nowadays from the international community. And he's the only president who can tell Israel, stop it. How he managed to make Israeli Prime Minister call the Qataris to apologize. He's the only one who could force the Israelis to do such an action. And he was the only one who came with this peace plan that we believe could be implemented. Yes, Trump tried to present himself as a broker of peace, and he's trying in Gaza. It took way too long. 10 months of suffering of the people took way too long. He did an initiative earlier in the year when Hamas released one American hostage from Gaza, and the war stopped for around 6 weeks. But that's why I'm telling you that we believe he's the only one who could have stopped it earlier. So the minute that you nominate someone like him to a peace prize, I don't think this is the right time for it. Maybe for next year, after this plan is implemented, maybe with his help to establish Palestinian state, we would actually help in the nomination. Once he recognizes our right to have our Palestinian state, then definitely yes.
And maybe a bit closer to home as well, because we're talking about the US. The EU, do you think the EU could have done and could do a bit more in helping resolve the conflict in some way or another? What do you make of the EU's action so far and a possible role for the EU going forward?
Well, good question, living in the EU. When it comes to the EU as an entity, not as countries, the EU has not done much for our cause. In contrary, they gave the Israel the right to defend themselves at the beginning of the war. And they never justified this position, and they never actually talked much about what suffering in Gaza, what the Palestinians have going through. They did not even take one position to recognize the Palestinian state until today. The EU they do not recognize states as an entity, but they could support the countries that make out the EU in recognizing Palestinian state. Even we've been suffering with aid from the EU lately. The EU has promised so much to the Palestinians, but for the past 3 years, even before the October 7th, the EU has not committed to the Palestinian aid. So we're not seeing the EU is united as it was before. When it comes to the Palestinian cause, we have seen almost half the EU recognize the state of Palestine now. And so many countries are on the way to, but in general, the EU as an entity has failed us during the past 2 years. They have committed to send humanitarian action to Gaza, to take positions, to take children to the EU countries, but they never had the honest will to end the suffering of the Palestinians by ending the attacks.
And what do you make of someone like the European Parliament President Roberta Metsola, who is a Maltese MEP at the end of the day, but she quickly ended up with this reputation of being more sympathetic towards Israel, especially because very shortly after the October 7th attacks, she was very quick to, organize, there was like a minute of silence or something at the European Parliament. She then traveled to Israel very shortly after that. So now, to a certain point, even among the Maltese people, she has this reputation of being more sympathetic towards Israel. But do you think that is fair? That is a fair reputation? What do you make of her action so far in such a leadership role in the EU?
Well, you're right. She visited Israel days after the attack, which we condemn, by the way. We condemn all the attacks of killing people. We're not in favor of killing any people. But taking side in our conflict doesn't make any sense. It's not a football match, sorry. It's about It's about humanity. It's about people. It's about justice. You cannot just take sides. We're not telling you to not take good actions with Israel. We're not telling any government not to have good relations with Israel. But that does not come at our cost. When it comes to the Palestinian-Israeli cause, it's not about taking sides, it's about being on the side of justice. We recognize Israel as a state as well. So when the President of the European Parliament decides to take the side of Israel, justifying Israel's right to attack the Palestinians in Gaza, killing over 70,000 people, where's the humanity in this? I've talked to actually the President of the Parliament when she was in Malta, and I justified to her what exactly she was talking about when she gave Israel the right of defense. And this was about after the killing of nearly 15,000 people only. And like her answer did not make much sense to me, to be honest. Like abiding by the book to what the European Parliament was calling for. But on the other hand, we have so many Maltese MEPs who are standing by justice. I don't want to mention names, but we really appreciate all their role in Brussels. So when it comes to international community, the US can influence Israel a lot. The EU did not take a big part in this, and we understand that the EU, if they're not united on one cause, they do not take action together, unfortunately.
And maybe I will close on a more playful question. Do you think Malta should boycott Eurovision if Israel remains in it, for example?
Well, as Minister Bonici have said, Eurovision is a place to exchange of culture, to exchange of art, to exchange of songs, exchange of people-to-people project. But we believe that people-to-people project should be done by people who are there for a goodwill. When it comes to Israel, you should rethink this position.
Okay, thank you.
It's not about Eurovision only, sorry. It's about all these people-to-people projects, including sports, including arts. So when it comes to talking to Israelis, you need to show them that Malta cares, that the humanity cares. So boycotting Eurovision is not something against art, it's not something against culture. It's about sending a message that we care about Palestinians too.
Grazzi tal-li segwejtu din l-intervista. Tistgħu segwu din l-intervista kif ukoll intervisti oħra fuq MaltaToday Co Ltd kif ukoll fuq is-social media pages tagħna. Insellmilkom.